All right, what about Through the Ages? So most of you probably didn't watch very much of the video coverage, and I can't blame you. This is not a game that comes across very well on the video. Like a lot of Euros, it's all about the optimizations and strategies as they kind of occur. And when I'm playing it solo, it's especially hard to kind of see the big picture. It's not like I played this enough to say, here's going to be this guy's strategy, and he's going to kind of stick to it no matter what. There is always, because there's luck in this game, there's a certain level of opportunism. Now, some of the frustration of trying to play this solo, especially on camera, I'm sure it came through. And I don't want to judge the game on that, because I don't think a solo playthrough gives this game the kind of treatment that it really deserves. It's just I don't know how else to do things. I guess I could have just done a quick hit on it or something, and left alone the whole playthrough. But honestly, I don't think that my reviews are worth watching. I think most of the information that you get out of the games that I look at, it really comes through in the playthroughs rather than the reviews. And the reviews are an attempt to sum up the things that I found that I've discovered. And one of the big things that I discovered with this one is, hey, this is not really a game that I want to solo a hell of a lot. I did have a lot of fun playing this with my wife, but I've got to say, no matter what, when you get towards the end of the game, the amount of game state that you have, not just collected on here. This looks tiny, but on all your cards and all the different modifiers and effects that are in play at once becomes painful. Keeping track of one player's position, though, is, just barely beginning to push my limits in, a game where I'm playing just one power. Which is clearly a sign that I shouldn't have been playing solo the way I did. So, this is almost like a distillation of... what it reminds me the most of is Age of Renaissance. It's, more than, advanced civilization. Advanced civilization, you have all the cards spread out in front of you. You can pick whatever you want. Age of Renaissance, well, you have all the advances spread out in front of you. But the amount of randomness that's going on in it, in terms of, I get to draw this, wow, that opens up some options, feels more at heart with this. Usually in an advanced Civ or Civ game, you can trade to get the resources that you need. You might not get exactly what you need. But here, the tableau that's put out in terms of the cards that are available to purchase, it's kind of a Vinci style setup where the further you go, the more you pay. Now, you don't end up giving cash to other people, but if you pick up things, you push events, you push items that you can purchase closer to the other players. It's a pretty standard mechanism. I've seen in a few games where things are expensive out at the end where they first show up. And if you really, really want them, you can break down and pay it. But then they move forward in price. And the nature of this game, in the two-player game, what I found was generally you had a couple of rounds to pick something up. In this, in the four-player, if you don't pick something up here, you may not see it again. Not because the other, not necessarily because the other players even want it. it could actually just fall off the edge of the thing before you get another shot. So you really do have to be willing to pay heavily for things you really want, which is kind of an interesting system. One of the biggest things that really griped me about this, and I was feeling it a little bit in the two-player game and definitely feeling it soloing it, is the amount of information being kept on these tracks and that it would invariably end up out of date. Another factor that's similar to that is some of the playing cards. By the way, the cards are really good quality for small cards, etc. They're really sturdy feeling. Some of the cards that came up had abilities that affected other people in ways that were hard to remember. That was kind of annoying. But most of it was just a matter of being able to keep all the game state in a correct values for the different tracks. I couldn't keep the event cards, properly distributed according to the rules. I just couldn't do it. I was continuously, sporadically but continuous, forgetting to pull an event or something like that, and it would just slowly build up this sort of dross of excess events in a stack, and it just was really beginning to irritate me in that sense. But also, I would constantly be counting. I don't like games where you have to count a lot, and the tracks in here are meant to keep you from having to count so much, but what I was finding was I was having to constantly recount because I couldn't keep the tracks aligned properly. I think I find games like After the Holocaust, with their record keeping on a piece of paper, or Europa Universalis, a lot easier to cope with. And this is not just a solo thing, it's just the soloing compounds the problem. If there's going to be a difficulty keeping all the game state on the track, with what really are reminder tracks, it's going to get a lot worse if I play it solo. And especially since, same with the issues with cards that affect multiple people, there's nobody else to say, hey, did you forget that? That would help you, or, you're cheating, man, you're forgetting that hurts you, right? That kind of reminder is very helpful to me, because I don't tend to keep things, I'm not somebody who likes to dot my I's and cross my T's or whatever on everything. As is obvious, However, there are a lot of things that I really like about this design, and maybe some of the mechanical things that feel clunky got corrected in the new upcoming, I don't know if it's out or not. I know there's supposed to be another edition coming out, and that's why I was able to get this one for fairly cheap, I would assume. I can't imagine that it would clean up everything. Another thing that I really dislike, I dislike the rulebook. The rulebook is terrible. It's filled with colors, distracting, and then it's got this stupid PI. I talked about that. Programmed instruction is just a terrible idea. It should never be tried. I have heard some people like a few games that have done it, but the vast majority of games are just generally looked at as, yeah, these rules are horrible because they tried to do this, It is just a bad choice, especially when you have to withdraw rules from the base game, as is the case here, in order to put them into the advanced game. Another component issue is these little discs. Pain in the bloody ass. Make them little hexagons or something so they don't go spinning off, rolling all over the place. I mean, I pick them up and they go pooh out of my fingers. They were a surprisingly bad design decision. But what do I like? What is so appealing about this game? Because I had a hell of a lot of fun playing this with my wife until about halfway through the third deck. And what's really appealing is that mixture of being able to choose a bunch of different routes that all can kind of get you someplace. Now, The one thing I learned in the 4-player game is you do not want to be far behind in military. If you're far behind in military, you're just going to get hosed, especially with lots of players, because you're just sitting there as a target. There's an option to handle that, but beyond that, you're still going to be kind of a weak punching bag for someone each round. If someone gets in the lead, they could be beat up by multiple attacks if they're in the same general range as other players. And we saw attempts at that, but nothing too serious was done in the game that I played. But anyway, there's these multiple different pathways that you can take. You can take a production type pathway where you're really trying to heavily build up your metals so that you can build lots of stuff at once. And then there's kind of the technology side of things. And how you want to mesh all of these together, because they're all interrelated and you need some of all of them. You can't just focus, okay, I'm just going for metal for the rest of the game. But you could go, I'm just going for metal, and then I'm going to make a kickstart into technology at some later date. And I found that worked pretty well in the 2-player game I played, where I went for production more, my wife went more for technology, and I was able to jump myself into a stronger position in the technology than she had because of the metal. But alternatively, there would have been other options. So for example, she had a very strong military, which she didn't use against me as well as she might have. So there's just all these interlocking things that you have to choose, and you have to look at everybody else's state and kind of understand what you want to take. And then you have the luck factor of, hey, what's out there? What can I get cheaply? What can I afford right now? What is my opportunistic play that kind of fits with my strategy and doesn't hurt it? A lot of the game ends up being, at least when I was playing opposed as opposed to solo, was kind of looking at, okay, how can I make sure that my society doesn't just kind of fall apart? And we saw, I think, at least a couple of cases, even not in the guy who lost the game by a lot's position. In a couple of cases where the production didn't really align well because I was paying attention to too many different countries at once, and where different players were maybe not able to meet the goals that they would have desired to meet, largely because of my distraction of playing multiple powers at once. If you can focus your entire, your mind on playing one power, you can kind of look and say, okay, well, while other people are going, you can start thinking about, how much metal am I going to need to do the things that I have in my hand? How am I going to prepare this? And then you can do your moves fairly quickly, and you don't have to be blundering around trying to think of what you can do and then making huge mistakes throughout. And there's something very nice about the kind of planning that's going on here, because it's not ironbound. It's not like, I don't know, there's a bunch of these worker placement type games and stuff where you're looking and saying, I have to exactly get this right and everything. You can't exactly get this right. There's going to be some variance based on what's coming up and what's available, what people are hitting you with, the random events that come out, which I think is a really cool mechanism, that you can play an event for later. So you get to decide what the world's going to be like later, and then it triggers a current event that, somebody seeded the deck with before. I think that's really cute. There's a lot of cool mechanisms in this thing. So overall, I really do like the concept behind the game, and I like the playing of the game up until that very last period. And that very last period, it's not like an 18xx game, which kind of gets to this draggy point where there's a lot of effort to do, but there may not be a lot going on in the game anymore in terms of big decisions. Here there's still continuing to be big choices that you can make and big swings that you can bring into play, because the cards become more and more valuable as time goes on. So you're able to, crank a lot of victory points, at least from your engine, later in the game. There might be big victory point generators that are kind of one-shots and stuff early in the game, like the action cards and such, that produce a decent amount. and you have a number of different possible ways to generate your points at the end. So you can generate your points just by like setting your society up so it generates a lot of culture, or you can kind of hope and build a wonder that allows you to get a lot of points off of a different side of things. So for example, lots of technology can just give you a skyrocket with the right wonder. You've got those kind of matches. So you've got like Napoleon, who matches really well if you've gone with a military strategy. You've got certain wonders that match really well if you've gone with a technology strategy or a mining and resource strategy. And the thing is, if somebody takes that away from you, they're probably not as poised to take advantage of those really important cards for you, but they may be preventing you from scoring buku points off of something that you were hoping for. Something that you would have been willing to, if you had been the first person to see it, you'd be willing to pay 3 for it. The question is somebody willing to stop you, hurt themselves, and pay 3 for it? Or do they just hope for their own best card to come up, or whatever? And there's a lot of that kind of dynamic in it. And I think that's really cool because it does keep your interest to the end. The only problem is the bookkeeping starts getting geometrically worse and worse as you're going on. It's a very simple game early on, moving a few pieces around. There's not a lot going on. But then it starts really stacking up. And like I said, it was getting to my limit in only 2 players, of course playing for the first time, and the full game and all that. Towards the end of the 3rd deck, and clearly trying to do all 4 powers at once, just a headache. And of course I compounded my headache in between finishing this and coming to do the review by playing probably the most nightmarish game of Thunderstone I've ever played. I actually quit it fairly shortly into it because it was so clear that A, I wasn't going to go anywhere, and B, it was going to take forever. It was going to take like 6 hours for a 2-player game of Thunderstone. So I mentioned this during the playthrough. I'm not sure I understand the high rating on this game. I understand it in some ways. There's no question. Like I said, it's a very, very cool game. But the level of bookkeeping on those little, in keeping all those charts up to date, and sort of the hump, the length of time that it takes, etc., it just feels heavier than what I would think most people actually prefer. So maybe there's a little bit of, this is a really great game, and the same kind of feeling goes with Age of Renaissance and Advanced Civ and stuff like that, which also get very high ratings. But the same kind of feeling with them. This is a little bit shorter game. There's no question of that. But there's a headache-ness to it that is definitely greater. You have to be balancing and aware of more things, and you have to do more counting. And maybe Eurogamers just don't mind counting as much as I do, but I hate counting. And I guess that's my personal dislike on it. That I'm a little surprised that doesn't affect more people is the counting and recounting. But then you think Dominant Species. It's a game about counting and recounting. And, same kind of factors as this. The only difference is this one has sort of a believable connection with most of the cards. There are a few that are kind of... Whereas Dominant Species doesn't really seem to be reflecting anything. It just seems to be a very, very heavy design of mechanisms, and they don't really reflect the things that are going on, in terms of evolutionary principles and such. This does seem to vaguely fit, the development of cultures and such not in a way that, seems sort of intuitive. And I like that. I like a game to be kind of intuitive. So there's a lot of room in this for someone to get better at the game by learning the deck, much like Age of Renaissance, where you're not going to be able to handle, a new player is not going to be able to do very well against established players. But sort of your intuitive ideas of what you should do in this game makes sense, right? I gotta build some production up so that I can do this, so that I can get people working on these things. And you can very much be guided by that and play a pretty good game. I don't feel like there's any intuitive link between the abstract system and something like Dominant Species and what the actual victory in the game ends up working out to be. So there you have that. Anyway, I guess that's all I have to say on this, more than I probably thought I had to say, but less than you probably wanted in terms of quality, if not quantity. All right.